Alright, so in this video I want to show you a couple more examples of how to chunk the text and annotate a text in the context of some specific prompts. So I'll give you two separate prompts at the top of the page here. The first one is a pretty standard prompt about theme. It's just about identifying how a theme develops over the course of a text and to illustrate it using textual support. Then the second one adds a new layer to that. It wants you to analyze theme, but specifically in the context of how figurative language helps to develop theme. So it's a multi-layered prompt. It's not just about theme, it's about how figurative language influences theme. So in these annotations, I'm going to explain how I combined chunking with annotating and identifying other things so I can help myself first find the theme and find those elements of figurative language, and then use the chunking to lead myself to the theme that will help me write my essay about those prompts. So this poem by Pablo Neruda, I would maybe pause the video here and read the poem just so you have a sense of how it works. But first of all, my first step in reading it was to get a sense of what the poem was saying and try to figure out where those chunks of meaning are throughout the poem. So how does the meaning change throughout? So this is a poem about the poet's love for his wife, I believe. And he's talking about the different ways in which he doesn't love her and loves her, and how it kind of fully contextualizes his love for her. So the first chunk of the poem is kind of like the first two lines here, where he's talking about how he doesn't love her. It's like, my love is not like this. And in the next couple of lines, he talks about how the love is. So he's comparing how it isn't to what it is. And then this second stanza here kind of builds on that to further define his love, kind of in the context of these things that are kind of hidden away within us, these secret ways of feeling about things that we don't necessarily share with the world. So he goes deeper into that. So then in the last stanza, the first three lines are kind of like just this direct, literal description of his love. And then the last three lines are more of a figurative way of looking at it. So what I kind of determined about how he's describing love and the way he feels, that kind of leads me toward theme, is that there's these different ways that he shows love, these two-sided ways, how I don't love you, how I do love you. This direct way of defining the love versus a figurative way, a literal versus figurative, not versus what I do feel. So there's this dual-sided thing where kind of the love is all-encompassing, both figurative and literal. There's the not side and there's the affirmative side. So the theme that I chose or decided to go with was love is a paradox, at once all-encompassing and also beyond comprehension. Because if you read this poem, you see that he's trying to wrap his mind around how much he loves her, in terms of how he feels and how he thinks, and how it affects him intellectually and emotionally. And he can define it, but sometimes he can't quite wrap his mind around it. So he knows he's fully encompassed by it, but his abilities to define it only take him so far. So what I did was, by a combination of chunking and also identifying by highlighting sort of the areas within those chunks that I will use to support the theme. And then also in terms of figurative language, I identified the similes that are there, so I can discuss how Neruda uses simile and also some repetition here to bring the theme forth. So I can use those things that I identified plus the chunks to show how theme develops and also how he uses figurative language. In this next poem, again, take a minute and you can pause this and read what the poem is about. This is a much different poem than the last one. So this is a poem about kind of the anticipation of moving and leaving a place and going somewhere new, and how that feels, and kind of the fear that comes with that, but also more so the idea that if you think about it and talk about it and just kind of give in to the reality and the inevitability of it, it kind of makes it a little bit easier, because it's going to happen one way or the other. But I did kind of the same thing. Again, this is with the figurative language and theme prompt. I chunked the text into these 4 chunks, just based on where I see kind of the ideas changing throughout the poem. And the chunks, it's not a set in stone thing. These chunks are not something that the poet assigned. They're something that I'm determining based on what the poet did. So the chunks are just a way to help me make sense of what the poet's trying to say. It's not something that's set in stone. It's more of a self-assigned guideline. But this first chunk kind of shows how there's this buildup of anticipation, but then a release of that anticipation when the people who are, or the person who is leaving, just kind of goes out and celebrates the time that she spent with the people that she's leaving. This next chunk is about that celebration, where people are just kind of letting it all out and enjoying themselves before they have to go. The third chunk is kind of about what happens, just kind of the mechanical process of moving and how that goes. And then the last part is just like the acceptance of leaving. The trees are waving their broken little hands. It's kind of like the trees are waving goodbye. It's like you just kind of have to accept that it's happening. So again, within each of those chunks, I identified the figurative language. I see some repetition in terms of wording in a couple different places. I also see some metaphors that are used throughout. So I decided that the 2 types of figurative language I'm going to discuss are metaphor and repetition. And then I used my chunks and what I identified about them to arrive at this theme about how leaving is difficult, but it's made easier when we accept its inevitability. So, is that exactly what the author intended to say? Is that exactly the right answer? I can't say for sure one way or the other, but what I know based on the evidence that I have found is that is the idea that I can support using the material that the author gave me, and the ideas that I was able to identify using the tools that I have available. So through a combination of using those tools and following kind of this roadmap that the author gave me, I can arrive at some meaning and also give myself enough material that I can write an essay about this poem.